things are not looking too good for Watch Dogs 2, at least here in the UK. We now have some data on how it's doing thanks to GFK Chart Track. Now at first it actually looks reasonable, as Watch Dogs 2 entered in the second spot in the top 10 chart, just below Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. However, things then take a turn when you see that Chart Track mentions that Infinite Warfare sales were down 46% from last week, which indirectly gives us a ballpark of sales for Watch Dogs 2 being below 80k, which is a huge drop of about 80% compared to the first game's 380k units sold in its debut week. Now, lower sales were even expected by Ubisoft, with executives from Ubisoft admitting in the latest earnings call that pre-orders were not as high as they initially hoped. However, this result is probably lower than their estimates, to say the least. Now, this is comparing launch week to launch week. Now, there are numerous factors to keep in mind here, and I do have a bit of a statement from Ubisoft, but I'll get to that in a second. So, what do we need to consider here? Well, let's consider Watch Dogs 1. That was hugely overhyped, far too overhyped, and of course, there was the infamous graphics downgrade. The game came out, and it was not what Ubisoft promised, and the huge amount of hype previous to launch left a lot of people with a bitter taste in their mouths about the game itself, about the graphics downgrade, about being lied to, about how Ubisoft had spun the story. All this stuff led to Watch Dogs 2 being a pretty big disappointment of that year. So naturally, people were cautious about Watch Dogs 2. Perhaps they expected something similar. Perhaps they expected a continuation of the theme of Watch Dogs 1. Now, by all accounts, Watch Dogs 2 is hugely improved, and perhaps reviews will eventually show that, and sales will pick up. But for a lot of people, the damage to the Watch Dogs franchise was done. Now, there's also a second thing that we need to keep in mind, in that there are only so many $60 AAA games that you can squeeze in. Every year, publishers and developers do this, and I don't understand why. A lot of them cram all their releases into the month of November. Basically means that every few days, like a year or two ago, it was really bad. Literally every few days there was a game coming out. And obviously for people with limited time, even if you have all the funds in the world, you've only got so much time to play these games. And for a lot of people, of course, it's probably a choice of like, I'll buy this game for myself and I'll put the other one that I want on my Christmas list or whatever. Maybe even just a case of like, I'll put it on my Christmas list and they can't afford to get it until then. So there is that to consider as well, that Watch Dogs 2 released in the insanely cramped pre-Christmas rush. And when it's competing with some pretty heavy hitters, and obviously the fact that you got the sort of blowback from Watch Dogs 1, it all kind of, I think, coalesced to mean that the sales of Watch Dogs 2 in comparison to the original are pretty heftily down. Now, I just want to give credit to the NeoGAF thread that will be linked in the description below for figuring out the whole this means it's down 80% to 80k thing. So thanks to them, we now know Watch Dogs 2 is not off to a good start at all. May it recover? Possibly. Once things calm down and people actually have time to play the game, possibly. Perhaps people went to see reviews and see that it's actually closer to the original vision of Watch Dogs 1. Possibly. Maybe when it goes on sale. Yeah, maybe. But it probably isn't going to match the sales of Watch Dogs 1, because a lot of people just went after that, no, not giving my money to that series, and that's it. Done. And to be fair, I can't really blame people, to be quite frank with you, because Watch Dogs 1 was a bit divisive, to say the least. Now, there's one thing I want to address quickly before I end the video. Is that a lot of people are saying that Watch Dogs 2 is an SJW game. And I'm like, what? How is it an SJW game? Someone please tell me this. I don't understand. Is it because the main character isn't white? Is that all it takes to be an SJW game these days? Seriously? I really hope that's not the reason, because that's just... no. No. Anyway, moving on. let's talk about that statement from Ubisoft, shall we? They said, quote, "We're incredibly happy with critics and players' very positive reception of Watch Dogs 2, which should bolster support for the long-term success of the game. It is true that first day and first week sales for a number of big games, including Watch Dogs 2 and titles from our competitors, are comparatively lower than previous versions in previous years. However, we expect both Week 2 and Week 3 sales to be above traditional sales patterns. There is a trend toward games, especially high-quality games, having stronger and longer tails as favourable reviews and word-of-mouth spread. Watch Dogs 2 is already considered a tremendous addition to the open-world action-adventure series, and we're confident that millions of players are going to love it." So, there you have it. Watch Dogs 2, people. Not looking good, but fingers crossed for a positive future. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.